The beginning of the end of anxiety. I had a fate encounter with a stranger recently. A lady messaged me over social media asking for help. Now, I didn't know this lady, I'd never spoken to her before. The account was anonymous, and presumably she didn't know me either, perhaps only that I'm some sort of doctor. But she did want help desperately. She wanted help with anxiety, and not just any anxiety, severe, crippling anxiety. She was anxious about two things in particular. The first being fear of losing a loved one, suddenly in an accident or some flash disease or illness, taking them away. Every time they'd leave the house, she'd be powerless to stop them, but while they were out, she'd worry herself to death. The second fear being the fear of the dark, or rather what lurked in the dark. She thought there was something out in the darkness trying to get her, something waiting around the corner to attack her. Whether it is a spirit or a ghost or a monster, these things started off mild enough, but before she knew it, they'd spiraled out of control and brought her right to her knees. She needed help, but she didn't know who to ask. But she did know this much, that she didn't want to go to the traditional doctors, the psychiatrists or the psychologists, because she didn't want to get labeled quote unquote crazy. And she didn't want to get quote unquote crazy people drugs. Because she'd had some experience with them and she'd noted that they numb a person, they don't treat them. And she didn't want to be numbed by medicine, she wanted help. Now I was in a bit of a doozy here. The first thing I told her was that I'm just not that kind of doctor. I'm not a professional, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and I don't think I could help in that regard, but I could help you as a person. As a person who's had to deal with his own anxieties and fears, and in trying to find solutions for those anxieties and fears, has developed a certain perspective and a set of opinions that perhaps might help. And so I proposed that the first step to solving anxiety and problems is to identify them, accept them, and give them a name. Give your problems a name, give your anxieties a name, and you may find that your anxieties' hold upon you loosens. The fundamental problem I saw here was the fear of the unknown. Whether it was the fear of the unknown future, what lies behind the corner of time? Does a death, disease, suffering, and pain lurk around the corner? That paralyzes people. The second thing was the fear of the unknown in the dark. The room that I spent my entire day in, the room that I've spent the past 10 years in, so familiar in the light, and the moment the lights go out, I just don't know anymore. Is everything where it's supposed to be, or is there something out there waiting to attack me? Now, for the sake of this argument, we'll have to agree that humans have evolved. Whether you believe it or not, humor me. Whether humans evolved from base animals, or whether they begun unsophisticated and over time became more sophisticated, whichever way you take it, humans have evolved. We are ancient beings. We're primitive beings. We've existed before thoughts. We've existed before fire. We've existed before artificial lights and society in general. We are old beings. And our minds, our brains, are our most vital structures. The brain is not rudimentary. No, not at all. The purpose of our brain is singular. It is to protect us, to help us survive. The brain is broadly divided into two parts. The first part being the newer brain, or the cortex or neocortex. This is the intelligent, rational thinking part of our brain. And this is very, very new. The 2 + 2 = 4 part. The rational, philosophical thinking part. The other part of our brain is our old brain, our primitive brain, our instinctual brain, the instincts of anger and rage and aggression and fear, our base primitive feelings. That is our old brain. It's been around for far, far longer than our new brain. And that is where the problem lies. See, we humans, we are ancient creatures. We have survived jungles and savannas and marshes and grasslands and deserts and ice wastes. And we have survived it using our old brain. We have survived millions of years using our old brain. And again, the purpose of our brain is to protect us. If you were an ancient human in the dark of night in a jungle, and a twig snapped around you, your primitive brain would kick into action, your pupils would dilate, you'd bolt upright, your body would be flooded with adrenaline, your heart rate would rise, and your body would be ready for fight and flight. Your brain would be telling you, wake up, be alert, use your eyes, use your imagination, find the threat that's lurking around you, because we were surrounded by predators and by poisonous insects and poisonous animals. We couldn't afford to not be afraid of the dark. The dark was where the unknown lurked, and the unknown could hold all sorts of threats. But now, for better or worse, we've outgrown our primitive minds. Now we have buildings, now we have security, now we don't really have the same fears anymore. And so we've built new ones. Now when you sit in the dark, well, your primitive brain, which has been around for millions of years, isn't just going to go away in a flash. No, it's still going to do its job. It's still going to try to protect you from the dangers that existed thousands and millions of years ago. It's going to tell you, be alert. There is something in this darkness, because there has been something in this darkness for millions of years, and I can't just ignore it. I can't just change overnight, and evolution is a very slow process. But our thinking brains know that there isn't really anything in the dark. There aren't any predators anymore. There aren't any poisonous animals or insects in general anymore. So it has to make things up to fill that fear gap. Now we're afraid of ghosts and spirits and monsters. Back in the day, if you saw a long coiled wire in the dark, you'd better think it's a snake, because you can't afford to think it's not a snake, because the danger was real. The danger was very real. If you were lax, you could get bitten, you could get hurt, and your brain's job was to protect you. Now, the odds that you run into a snake in your room are quite small. If you see a coiled structure in your room, the likelihood that it's a USB cable or a power plug or a wire of some sort is far higher than a snake. But the job of your primitive mind is to protect you. It's your first instinct. And so you might end up seeing a snake. And so, with this knowledge comes power. How do you use this? You use this by not judging yourself anymore. Every time you feel anxious, know that it isn't anxiety. It is your brain trying to protect you. Old mechanisms of self-defense. Don't judge them, flow into them. Don't judge them, relax. If there is truly something to worry about, give it some thought. And if there isn't, you lie secure, knowing that your brain is only trying to look out for you. If you hear a sound in the middle of the night and you bolt up, worrying that it's something very strange, but when you pay attention, it's just a dog barking outside, you relax. You lie back in your bed knowing it's only just a dog. In the same way, if you feel a pang of anxiety rising up inside you, know that it's only just your body trying to defend you. It's the same way with your parents. If you're afraid of losing your parents, you should understand that the brain's primary objective is to protect you, and your parents are your lifeline. Your parents are your sustenance. Losing your parents would be devastating to you in a very real way, not just emotionally, but physically. Now, I know I run the risk of sounding very robotic by saying these things, that you're trying to belittle our emotions, or that you're trying to overlook human emotions. What is the point of human emotions if everything is so robotic and based on survival? I understand where you're coming from, but there is a place and time for feelings, and there is a place and time for rationality and understanding. Use them to help you. Don't let them use you. The trouble with anxiety is that we get into a spiral. We get anxious, and then we get anxious about being anxious. We blame ourselves, we judge ourselves. Why are you getting anxious? There's nothing to be anxious about, and that never helps. It makes you even more anxious. But now we have knowledge. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is the light in the dark. Give your fears a name. That is the first step. Perhaps a small step. Perhaps a small light in the dark. Perhaps a small candle in a giant chasm, in a giant abyss of darkness. But it is nevertheless a light. And with that light, you can take your first step on the path. And when you get on the path, you get on the path to healing.